Well, I'm glad you're here today. Welcome, welcome. We're going to be continuing this series, and we're going to be talking about anger today. And so I read that on June 9th, 2022, a guy named Vernie Dickens, 33 years old, walked into Drake's Barbershop in Kansas City, Missouri, and he asked if he could have a discounted haircut. And so one of the barbers agreed to do that, gave him the haircut at a discounted price, but when they were finished, Vernie was not happy with the haircut. He expressed his disagreement, but he walked out. The next day, however, he came back and shot the barber. That's kind of an extreme reaction to a haircut, don't you think? Hasn't he ever heard, you get what you pay for? Like, if you want a good haircut, just pay the full price. But doesn't it seem to you that a lot of people these days are angry, like all the time? They just live with a scowl on their face, always upset about everything. Not everybody goes to the extreme of shooting a person they're mad at, but there's a lot of yelling and backbiting and criticizing that goes on over small issues. Like, how many times have you seen somebody post a rant on social media over something that just seems so small? The service at McDonald's was slow. The guy in front of me didn't go when the light turned green. Why isn't this business open after 5 p.m.? Don't they know people have to work? Sometimes they even start their post by saying, okay, long rant, but I just can't take this anymore. And what they're so upset about that they have to vent to the entire world is the self-checkout lines at Walmart. Like, we just seem to be angry about everything all the time. Now, it's okay if you don't like something, but why does it make you that mad? Or what about youth sports? A lot of anger in youth sports these days, not from the youth, but from the parents, of course. I read about an incident in Laurel, Mississippi, where the umpire of a 12-year-old softball game was assaulted in the parking lot. A parent came up and punched him in the face, and the mom who punched him was wearing a t-shirt that said, "Best Mom of the Year." This kind of abuse is getting so bad. A lot of officials are quitting. It's getting harder and harder to find referees for games all over the country. The shortage got so bad in Deptford, New Jersey, that the president of the town's Little League instituted a new rule. If a parent got upset and argued with one of the umpires, they would be banned from all future Little League games until they suited up and umpired 3 games of their own. Like, we'll show you a little bit of what this is like. Anger is an issue for a lot of people, and I would ask today, what about you? So we're in this series that I've called Blinkers. Blinkers not being the blinkers on the car, but rather that horse tack that blinds them from seeing what is around them. And what we're taking a look at is some of these issues in our lives that we're blind to in ourselves. Like, other people can see it in us, but we struggle to see it in us. And so how many of us have anger issues that we are blind to in our own lives? So maybe you would sit there and think, well, I don't have trouble with anger. This message really doesn't apply to me. But what would someone else say? Like, what would your spouse say? If you ask them, do I have anger issues? Would there be a little bit of a pause? Would they not want to answer, afraid for how you might react? Maybe they're going to punch you in the face, shoot you the next day, something like that. Anger issues that creep into our lives. What would your child say if you asked them that? What would your closest friend say? Because sometimes we don't see it in ourselves. So we're going to take a look at a character in the Bible today who overreacted to some anger in his life. Cain, one of the sons of Adam and Eve, was so angry that he killed his younger brother Abel. And it was over something that didn't warrant that kind of a reaction. So we're going to look at this in Genesis chapter 4 today, see what we can learn for our own lives. So chapter 4, verse 2 of Genesis reads like this. It says, Abel kept the flocks and Cain worked the soil. So you've got a farmer and a shepherd here. And in the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord, and Abel also brought an offering, the fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. And the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. So both of these brothers bring their offering to the Lord. Cain brought what he produced of his crops, and Abel brought what he produced of his livestock. And Abel is bringing the best that he has to offer. The phrase that it uses there in the Bible is the fat portions that are there, an expression that meant the really good parts. I think kind of in our society today, we think of the fat portions as that which you throw away. We want the lean cut of meat. But if you're in a position where you don't have a whole lot of food and you're looking for the most nutrition that you can get out of it, what you need to survive, it's like the fat portions. If you've ever watched that show Alone, I've mentioned that several times in sermons, but they're looking for any animals that they can get, and they want the fat. That's what they need to take in, is the fat portions of that animal. And so he's bringing in the fat portions, the best parts, and yet Cain is bringing his grain, and it seems that he's bringing the leftovers, not the best parts. The parts that he doesn't really want, that's what he's offering to the Lord. So the Lord is pleased with Abel, but not with Cain, and this makes Cain very angry. Now, I just want to pause for a moment and say that not all anger is bad. Like, we're going to be talking about anger today and some of the negative effects of that, consequences of it. But not all anger is bad. Because we can be angry about injustices that we see, and it motivates us to do something about it. So perhaps some of you have seen the movie Sound of Freedom. It was based on the true story of Tim Ballard, who was angry about what he saw in sex trafficking around the world. And so he quit his job with the U.S. government and went in to rescue some kids that were stolen for sex trafficking. And in that operation, he wound up rescuing 54 kids that had been taken by force and then put into sex traffic. Since that time, he has started his own foundation called Operation Underground Railroad, and they have rescued thousands of kids, and they have arrested thousands of sex traffickers. His anger led him to take action. Jesus, we read in the Bible, was angry when he went into the temple and they had set up shop in there. And he says, "You've turned my house of prayer into a den of thieves and robbers." He was angry about what was going on. So not all anger is bad. We can be angry at sin and do something about it. But that's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about the kind of anger that is over small issues that shouldn't bother us, but yet they do because they impact us in a negative way. And so we get angry and we lash out in some way. So Cain had a sinful kind of anger going on. That's usually what we have. And the Lord asked him a question in verse 6 that we ought to all ask ourselves. God said to him, "Why are you angry?" Why are you angry? When we get angry, why is that? When we have that emotional reaction, something happens and we start to blow up over it, that ought to be the first question we ask ourselves. Why am I angry? And analyze that a little bit. What sets you off? Like when you get mad and you're yelling at your family, slamming the door, giving the silent treatment, stewing for a few days, rehearsing a speech in your mind that you're never going to give, but it makes you feel better internally to do that. Why are you angry? What caused that? When you're throwing things and punching holes in the wall and ranting on social media, punching an umpire in the face, why are you reacting that way? What is it that has brought that about in you? Now, we could probably come up with a long list of reasons that we would throw out there. Well, they said something that made me mad. We're in a hurry and everything is going wrong. My boss didn't give me the raise that was promised. A sibling forgot to call again. It's been decades. They're irresponsible. This has been going on forever and ever, and I've just had it Everybody has a different idea about how the family inheritance ought to be split up. That has made me angry. They all want some big portion. I feel like I'm getting cheated. But I want you to consider that anger is often a secondary emotion. Anger often comes out of us when something else is really going on. There's another emotion that is first, but we respond with anger. So let me give you a few examples. One of those is fear. When we are fearful, it's often anger that comes out of us. So if somebody pulls a practical joke on you, where they scare you, we often react with anger. Have you seen those? You remember America's Funniest Home Videos? They would just have these long segments of people playing practical jokes. I don't know, you open up the freezer and they've got some kind of a dead raccoon in there. Somebody jumps out from behind a door. They've got a little play mouse on a string, and when they come in the door, they jerk it across the floor. They're really scared of mice. And so how do they often respond when they are angry? There's this moment of fear, but then they are mad, and they start screaming and tearing into the person who did this. Fear often brings that out of us. When my kids were young, and one of them would get hurt, maybe they were on trampoline jumping together and they wound up bumping their heads, and there's a gash that needs stitches, and they come running to the house and there's blood running down their face. My reaction would often be anger. And I wasn't like yelling at them and angry at them, but I was just so agitated. And Sherry would ask me, "Why are you angry?" And I'm going, "I don't know. But I am." But what was going on is that here comes my daughter with blood running down her face, and she's screaming and crying. I'm scared. There's a fear reaction going on there, and it comes out as anger. It's the secondary emotion. I think sometimes the first emotion is embarrassment. We're embarrassed, but it comes out as anger. So you're a teenager, and somebody in the friend group points at you and laughs and says, "You got a booger hanging out of your nose." And you respond by, "Well, your whole face is a booger." But what's really going on is embarrassment. But it comes out as anger when we do that. I think another emotion sometimes is shame. Like we know that we're hiding a sin and somebody is finding out about that. We're living with this secret. And so we just tend to get angry at people who are close to us. Or what about this one? Fatigue. We're just tired. We're running ourselves ragged. We've got too much to do. We're not getting our job done at work. We know that we're not doing a good job because we're not getting our job done there. We're not getting our job done at home. We're just worn out, and everything comes out as anger. So anger is often a secondary emotion. There's something else that's happening first. Anger comes out second. I think for Cain, the underlying emotion was jealousy. He was jealous of his brother, that he was receiving God's favor and yet he was not. I'm jealous of you. And the secondary emotion that came out of him then was anger. And so he's very angry. So as you evaluate your life and anger comes out of you, what is it really that's going on first? What is it that anger is coming out of? And sometimes that's hard to see in ourselves. Like we have trouble evaluating that because we've got the blinkers on. We can't see that. We don't even recognize that we're angry a lot, let alone what it's coming out of. And so maybe we need to do some asking of people around us. What do you see going on in my life? People that you would know and trust and know you well enough to answer that kind of a question. What's happening that bears that out? So what do we learn from Cain about dealing with our own anger? We got a few points here that I want to make. What do we learn? First is don't overreact. When something happens, don't overreact. We get angry, we tend to act irrationally. We go overboard, we do things we never would normally do. In Genesis chapter 4 and verse 8, It reads, Cain said to his brother Abel, listen to how he's setting him up. Let's go out to the field. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Let's go out to the field. Well, Cain was the shepherd and Abel was the farmer. Like, hey, let's go out and take a look at your crops. Let's get away from people and the house and mom and dad. And like, this is premeditated murder that's going on. Let's go out to the field, and he kills him. Isn't that going a little far because of jealousy? That's taken it to an extreme level. Now, I doubt anybody here has murdered someone out of anger. Probably not. But what have you done? Out of anger, have you really let somebody have it? You're yelling at them. Have you hit somebody out of anger? Have you talked to them? Have you talked about them behind their back to anybody who will listen? Like you're mad at this person, and you feel like you're getting even by telling somebody else how terrible they are. Have you taken a Louisville Slugger to both headlights? Slashed a hole in all 4 tires? Somebody ought to write a song like that. I think that could go over really well. I remember years ago, a doctor that I was seeing told me that when he was in college, he had a professor that he didn't like. And he wasn't liked by most of the students. And so they were trying to figure out how they would get even with him. And so they decided they would put a ping pong ball in the gas tank of his car. Like that was back in the day before the little small hole, for the unleaded gasoline. The hole used to be bigger for the regular gasoline. They slipped a ping pong ball in there and it goes down into his gas tank. And he said what would happen is that his car would run fine until he got to about a quarter of a tank, and then that ping pong ball would get sucked up against the intake of the gasoline and his car would die. And so then car would die, it would release the pressure, ping pong ball would float away, it would start up again. But then he would run it for a little while longer, it would suck the ping pong ball up against there, car would die again. He said he took it to all kinds of mechanics. Nobody could figure out what was wrong with it. He finally just had to sell the car. But that's what they would do. What have you done? Often we overreact. So our spouse says something to us that we don't like. So in anger, we say something back even worse. An employee doesn't get their work done, so in anger, we berate them. Our child makes a mess in the kitchen, and so we just kind of start this yelling adventure with them. Bob Russell is a retired minister, and I remember hearing him tell a story about earlier in his ministry when they had a Sunday night program they were doing. They had invited a singing group in to do a half hour of music, kind of special music for everybody, and then Bob was to preach for 30 minutes after that. Well, this singing group began singing, and they didn't stop at a half hour. They sang for an hour and 10 minutes. And Bob said, when it came time for me to preach, all I could do was get up and say, thank you for coming, and dismiss everybody. Well, he had, of course, worked on that sermon, getting that ready, and he said, I was angry because everybody knew that singing group always went too long. Like that was just their regular MO. And so he said, I was angry with our worship leader for not telling them, like, hey, this time is fixed. You cannot go over 30 minutes. This is set. And so he calls the worship minister on his way home from the church that evening, and he said he didn't answer his phone, but I left him a message, and he said, I let him have it. Like, how could you do this? And then he said the next day, he said, I was right about the situation, and the music minister should have been apologizing to me, but because I overreacted, I had to apologize to him. We overreact in those situations. A second lesson I think we can learn from Cain is to consider the negative consequences of what we do. When we're angry, we often fail to think things through to their conclusion. We just kind of do what makes us feel good in the moment. And so we usually don't make good decisions when we are angry. But what happens after our moment of anger might not be what we wanted. In verse 9, after Cain had killed Abel, we read, then the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? Oh, yeah, I didn't think I'd get asked about this. So he replies, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Like God didn't know. The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Sometimes a disastrous outburst of anger results in consequences we don't want. And that's what happened to Cain. He was angry, he reacted emotionally, he did something extreme, but then the consequences for him were pretty severe. And that's often what happens to us. We kind of give that outburst of anger, makes us feel good in the moment, but then what comes after that isn't good for us. Frank McMurray was a guy who had reason to be angry. He grew up with a stepdad who was angry all the time, berated him, yelled at him, called him names. He said when he was a boy, he would often go with his mom into the supermarket and look around at all the men in the store, seeing if he could find some resemblance, thinking maybe that's my real dad. His grandpa was his only father figure, but his grandpa died when he was 5 years old. So he was angry. In grade school, he began to lash out and become the bully. That all led to one night as a young man, a road rage incident where he killed Mario Olivio. Out of anger, that was what he did. But that burst of anger led to a lifetime in prison. Often the consequences, we don't think things through. And maybe the result of your anger didn't put you in prison, but has it caused a divorce? Or your kids haven't spoken to you in years? Or you lost a good job, or you have no friends? What's been the result of your anger? The last lesson from Cain is that we just need to do what is right. Sometimes we bring trouble on ourselves, and Cain blamed his brother Abel. He was angry because God looked with favor on Abel's offering and not his. But all Cain had to do was what was right. All he had to do was bring his best offering. Oh, you're pleased with my brother and his offering? I see what I need to do now. I'll bring my best offering. I'll bring the best of the grain that I have. In verse 7, the Lord said to Cain, "If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." So it's interesting to note that God said this to Cain before he killed his brother Abel. Look, all you got to do is what's right. Just bring the best of your offering. So you have two options. You can kill Abel and be separated from God for the rest of your life, or you can do what is right and be accepted by God. And it seems like such a simple choice when we look at it that rationally. But anger blinds us. Sin is crouching at our door. It desires to have us, but we must rule over it. So when you're angry, what's causing that? What's the root emotion that is being born out of? When you feel angry, let that be your first reaction. Instead of the immediate volcano eruption, I'm angry. What is causing this? What's the root emotion that's going on here? But then I want you to consider the choice that you have in that moment. I can either blow up and then face consequences that will come back on me that I might not want, or I can simply do what is right. When your spouse makes you mad and you want to lash out, you can yell and make the situation worse, or you can ask, what's wrong? What's bringing this out of you? When a referee makes a call that you don't like, you can scream and boo and tell them that they're blind and need glasses. Or you can suit up and call the game yourself. When you get a haircut you don't like, you have two options. When you're angry over whatever it is, there are two options. Which one of those directions are you going to go? You going to blow up and make the situation worse, bring consequences back on yourself, or will you do what God told Cain to do? Just do what's right. Let's pray. Father, we've all been angry. And maybe some people are angry right now. Maybe we even have good reason to be. But I pray we would consider the consequences. Where will our actions lead us? And I pray that we would do what is right and not let sin have us. In Christ's name, amen.